This is the Hoff Time Report with Idaho Freedom Foundation President Wayne Hoffman, one of Idaho's most respected, influential public policy voices.
All right.
Did the video play? I don't know. On my end, it didn't look like anything happened.
Yeah, it played. You're good.
Oh, the technology. Hey, guys, welcome back to the Hoff Time Report. We've got a couple special, very, very special guests. One of them is more special than the other, but I won't say which one. You'll have to decide by the end of the video with your votes or something. I'm just kidding. We got Craig Pruett, the editor of the Idaho Dispatch, and Bryan Hyde from our podcast, Nowhere to Hide. Welcome, gentlemen.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, seemed like a good time to kind of take a little pause and talk about the news media, because both of you come at, and I do too, come at our relationships with the news media from different perspectives. I, of course, spent almost 20 years in journalism, and then I was on the other side of the equation when I was working for a member of Congress, and I worked for a couple of state agencies, and I also worked on some campaigns. And then, of course, with the Freedom Foundation, we just pretty much gave up talking to the legacy news media. There are occasions when we make exceptions to that rule when it's somebody we haven't dealt with before, don't really have experience with their news organization. But of course, Greg is trying to fill an interesting role in providing. I mean, you're not a trained journalist, but I tell people you do better journalism than a lot of news reporters who are trained in the profession do. And then Bryan's been doing a lot of podcasts on just what he's seeing in the news media, just kind of speaking truth to power, calling out stories that as being biased, that maybe people didn't really look at it as being biased, but he's been able to identify, usages of certain words to make a story into what it is, and it being left of center, not just biased, left of center. But it kind of give me an idea, guys. I don't know who wants to start first, but what do you think? What's going on in the media? What are you seeing? What kind of led you to the spot that you're in now, in either writing or critiquing the legacy news media?
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, thanks. So, Wayne, I mean, years and years ago, I think the media here in Idaho was a lot different than it is now. And like you said, you used to be part of that. So, and you've watched this shift over the years. And I don't know if it was Trump maybe that really caused a left turn in the legacy media in Idaho. But it's really different. I mean, typically the media will kind of tailor to their audience, right? If you live in a very liberal state, it's probably going to slant maybe more liberal. If you live in a conservative state, the media will typically slant that direction because they want the subscribers, they want the donors, and they want the advertisers who will support that. But it's really strange because I've watched the media turn very far to the left in Idaho, which ultimately was a major part of why we started the Idaho Dispatch, is because I got tired of the bias. I got tired of, and everybody knows that I'm an activist outside of what I do with the Idaho Dispatch. It's no secret. You can Google my name. You're going to see what I do. But I thought, everybody's got their own personal bias. The question is, can you separate that once you're writing a news article, can you separate that? And it seems like a lot of the legacy media has forgotten, or they don't care to even try and do it anymore. And so I made it an effort with Idaho Dispatch when we started it to go, okay, if the media in Idaho is forgetting how to do their jobs correctly, can I do it? I'm not a trained journalist. I have a master's degree. It has nothing to do with journalism. I just said, it can't be that hard to just write it and go, I'm just going to leave out my own personal bias to the best of my ability and just cover this fairly, give everyone a fair opportunity to defend their position, especially when it comes to politics. And so that's why we ended up starting the Idaho Dispatch.
I got my
How about you, Bryan?
I started in media in Idaho right out of high school. I started in radio, and I uttered the fateful words, "I will never do talk radio," which about 10 years later, I found myself doing. And that's where I first became acquainted with some of the bias in Idaho media. If I mention the name Steve Hartgen, that's probably one that would be familiar to you. And that's one of the very first people I ended up locking horns with as a brand new talk show host. I found that as he was the publisher of the Times News in Twin Falls, and very aggressive in going after who stepped outside of what I would call the boundaries of approved opinion. And so that was my first introduction to, wow, there are some people who take this very, very seriously. Now, at the time, I was kind of a red meat thrower myself. I was, Rush Limbaugh was the king of the airwaves as far as radio goes, and I was following in his footsteps and felt like this is a lot of fun to call out that bias. My only regret is that I allowed myself to buy into a very enemy-driven kind of thinking in those early years. And it wasn't until later on in my career that I started to realize it's important to speak the truth, but I've got to do it in a way that isn't just making people upset. And as I became more clued into learning to speak the truth that I'm speaking to, in other words, not trying to beat them into submission with my opinion, I became very aware of the bias in the legacy media. It's not a matter of we're going to make sure that we're giving you the facts and let you make your own mind up. It felt very much like we were being forced into towing a certain line, and if you didn't, then you were labeled a troublemaker, and character assassination was applied. And so I've watched that with a lot of interest, and happy to be doing my part to try to counter some of that. But I'm also amazed, and Greg, you alluded to, Idaho media definitely has taken a pretty hard turn to the left in terms of the legacy media. I'm not sure why that is, but it's a definite challenge for us.
Yeah, did we lose Wayne?
I think Wayne may have stepped out for a moment.
Wayne disappeared. So yeah, I mean, look, we can continue on with that. And again, I'm not even saying that, at the Idaho Dispatch, I'm perfect, but I do my best. I don't even label groups, honestly. I mean, I try so hard not to push people to think in a certain direction. All I want to do is put out the truth, put out the facts, and let people decide. So there are groups on the right and there are groups on the left, so to speak, here in Idaho. And so you take a group like Reclaim Idaho or the Idaho 97%. And when I write about those groups, I just say the Idaho 97%. I don't say the far left extremist group, the Idaho 97%. Whereas the Idaho media, every time there's a group on the right, they're a far right extremist group, or they're far right. And they're trying to push the public into thinking about that group in a certain way. I don't need to do that. In my opinion, if you're paying attention to Idaho politics and you're paying attention to the news, you're going to see that for yourself. Hey, here's what this group is doing. I believe that they are far left or they are far right based on their actions and their words. It shouldn't be my job as a journalist to tell you, oh, this is a far left extremist group, right? So that kind of stuff just kind of really irritates me. And so I've done our best at the Idaho Dispatch to just write what the news is, just write what the facts are. And despite I'm a very conservative person, but I have liberals tell me, hey, are you liberal or conservative? Because I can't really tell based on how you're writing. And I'm like, you're welcome. I don't know. I don't know what else to say.
It's a good sign if both sides are frustrated with you. It probably means you're being pretty fair and even-handed. And Greg, yeah. you mentioned something that, to me, this is the epitome of the difference between journalism and narrative management. Narrative management relies on labels. It relies on very emotion-laden words to try to elicit some kind of emotional association or response from the viewer, the reader, or the listener. In this case, you are trying to give people facts to make up their own minds, and that's the difference between you and the people who say, well, we are professional journalists, and would snicker at you saying you're not a professional, but at least you're giving people the ability to make up their own mind as opposed to trying to lead them along a particular storyline.
Well, yeah, I mean, I will say it's hard, right? It is hard in this day and age, because news is either really pushing you in a conservative viewpoint and a conservative slant, or it's very liberal, right? And the legacy media is very liberal, and there's a lot of alternatives that are very conservative. So when we started the Idaho Dispatch, everybody's like, finally, a conservative news media outlet. And I said, no, there's plenty of those. We don't need any more of those. Can we have one that just tries to do it down the middle, that just tries to be neutral and objective as possible and not push an agenda on folks? And it's hard sometimes because I have my own bias, but I start writing and I'm like, no, I'm going to write it the way that it's supposed to be written. And again, I'm not going to sit here and claim that I'm the greatest writer, I'm the greatest journalist, anything like that. But I just feel that there's a gap. And I feel that both sides would benefit from a news organization that tries to do news the way that it was done decades and decades ago, and isn't really done this way anymore. So
that authenticity is what gives you credibility, in my opinion. I see Wayne is back with us. Wayne, I'm going to yield the floor back to you.
Yeah, my phone decided it was overheated, and so it just died on me. So I'm back as long as my phone doesn't overheat again. One of the things that I was wondering is, do you think, I mean, is there, as you talk to folks, I'm going to put you on the spot, is there a news outlet that you think in Idaho is the legacy news outlet that is the most conservative, shall we say?
No, I can't think of a major news outlet, whether it's a paper or a TV, that is really conservative, so to speak. I mean, there may be like a small local paper in a town that I don't know and I don't really follow that is. Channel 2 in Boise does, I think, maybe a more decent job than Channel 7 and most of the others. But, I can't think of one, honestly, in the legacy media that really that's either very neutral or is slanted conservative. I can't think of one.
Yeah, concur. I've moved back to Idaho a year ago after 25 years away, and so I'm still trying to get to know, among all the things that have changed, I'm trying to get a feel for, I have kind of the same question, Wayne, are there media sources that tend to lean more towards a conservative point of view, or for that matter, just, to tell it straight, let us make up our own minds? But I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I sure see a lot that definitely have a hard left turn, in what they're reporting.
Yeah. Do you think that, I mean, I remember, it's interesting because, Bryan, you mentioned Steve Hartkin. And I remember when Steve Hartkin was the publisher of the Times News, people claimed that the Times News was conservative. And they also said that about the Idaho Press Tribune. When I worked there, the Idaho Press Tribune was the conservative newspaper. And I don't recall ever feeling that was really demonstrated by anything in truth. What do you guys think?
I think, I'm going to drop a name here, and hopefully I'm not offending people when I say this, but in the same way that John McCain was a staunch conservative, yes, the Times News was conservative in that it was very establishment, very much towing the line, and really anybody who was outside of a very narrow ideological viewpoint, boy, they came after him, just both barrels.
Yeah. Yeah, Wayne, do you have like your air conditioner blowing on your mic or something? Do you know?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Yeah, there's a lot of sound coming from your mic. I don't know if you've got air conditioner blowing on it or something, but just as an FYI.
Oh, I was trying to keep the phone cool.
Yeah, no, you're fine, but
guess I can't have everything, huh?
You can't have your cake and eat it too. So we do have I'll interrupt here real quick just because I know you wanted me to watch the comments. But Maria Nate, who was just elected as the Idaho GOP state secretary, she said, "What's wrong with having a flat out conservative media source in Idaho?" And I'll answer a question, I guess, first, and then you guys can chime in. I don't think there's anything wrong with it necessarily. I guess for me, and it's hard when you the three of us, and I know Maria is, you're deeply involved in politics. When I start talking to family members who aren't involved in politics, they don't understand a lot of this stuff that's going on. They're not into it. And so a lot of them have read the Idaho Dispatch when they hear a story on the legacy media, and then I write about it, and they're like, well, yours made a lot more sense, and I understand it better from this. And so I guess my goal with the Idaho Dispatch wasn't just to reach conservatives, which obviously makes up a large portion of Idaho's population, but it's more about, what about all the people in the middle? You know, the other regular Idahoans, they're expecting unbiased news, not necessarily slanted towards conservatives. And I think honestly, maybe even with liberals can read our news outlet and say, hey, that makes a lot more sense. I kind of understand. I don't like it. I don't agree with it necessarily, but I understand it based on you just posting what the facts are. So I don't
Are
think
you
there's anything
covering
wrong.
Are you covering different things though than the legacy media? Or are you covering the same thing differently?
So sometimes we'll take a story that goes statewide and is slanted, and the legacy media has only really done one side, and we'll take that same story, and try to write it as unbiased as we can, right? So we'll do that, and then we'll also try to do stories that the legacy media isn't covering.
I don't think it's as
Bryan,
important.
are there?
The labels, I think sometimes we get hung up on. I can learn something from even sources that traditionally, kind of lean liberal, if they're being factual in their reporting. And if a source says, well, we're conservative in the way we report it, this is one of the things I really appreciated about what Greg was saying, is he says, look, I'm not perfect. I'm not free of bias. And I think if we can just approach it with the understanding, no source is free of bias. Any fact checking is going to be on us as consumers. We just got to learn to trust ourselves, to be willing to consume enough information and sort it, and be willing to ask the hard questions that help flesh out the bigger picture of what's going on, that we can tell, okay, this one is more factual, or this one gives me a broader perspective or a better understanding, as opposed to this one is confirming what I already want to believe because it makes my my ideology, thrill when I hear somebody agreeing with me. And that's tough, because we like to be right, and we don't want to be proven wrong. But if you can get comfortable with challenging assumptions and comfortable with learning to accept truth from any source as opposed to just propaganda, I think that's the key to finding media that you can trust. And on occasion, sometimes the big legacy media will get it right, but we have to be very vigilant.
Yeah.
Is that a recent phenomenon? I mean, you mentioned the Trump election, but do you think it's more pronounced than it was pre-Trump?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think once Trump got elected, the national media obviously went way to the left. I mean, it was absolutely insane. And I think that ultimately trickled down into the local reporting, because as you know, Wayne, especially with the newspapers, most of the newspapers in the country are owned by like 2 or 3 companies, right? Especially the big newspapers. And so everybody kind of made a pretty massive shift to the left, and I think the same thing has happened with the TV news media as well. I can't say who it is and how I know, but I know an individual who left Channel 7 that said it's turning hard. It's turning hard to the left. And this is about a year ago when I talked to this person, and they said they're not even trying anymore. They don't care. I mean, you can look at some of their biggest reporters on Twitter, and you can see their bias on their blue checkmark approved Twitter feeds, which is fine. Again, I don't care if a reporter has a bias, right? Except when that bias enters into their work, and that's when it becomes a problem. And then that's why conservatives like you, Wayne, you don't want to talk to them, because you're not going to get a fair shake. They're going to do this huge article about some organization, and they're going to do like 1 or 2 lines from your 30-minute conversation just so they can say they talked to you and tried to get your side of the story. Where with Idaho Dispatch, I'll tell them, I'll put in your entire quote. If it's 300 words, I'll put the whole thing in there. And because I don't want to take you out of context, I don't want to misquote you, I don't want you to feel like you were slighted with the interview, and I'll do that for any side.
I get a lot of media inquiries still. But of course, we have a standing policy that says we're not going to talk to to the legacy news media, and sometimes we make exceptions. But the reason for that is because so often I'll get an email from a reporter, and it will say something to the effect, "I've written this story, we want to get your comment." Well, if you've already written the story, then why do you need a comment from me? I thought you were trying to, learn what was going on so you could report accurately what the different sides think of a particular issue. How do you approach that? I mean, do you find yourself doing that too? I'm writing this story. Can I have a comment? Or do you? I mean, what do you typically do when you contact folks?
So when I reach out, and I mean, I'm a one-man show right now as far as the actual news articles. And so usually I send off my questions right away, knowing that it can take time for them to respond. But yeah, I'll reach out usually, especially like during the legislative session, I'll reach out to 3 or 4 Republicans, 3 or 4 Democrats, and I try to get it from a broad spectrum of where they stand politically within their own parties. And so I tried to my best to send off those questions right away, and in large part because I know it takes time for them to open their email and respond and all that kind of stuff. And I want to try to get something from both sides the best I can. But really, Wayne, I mean, I really just try to think, okay, what is the headline? Okay, and I'm not going to sensationalize it, and maybe that hurts my readership. I'm sure it does, because we try not to use hyperbole. We try not to use clickbait headlines. We try to just say, hey, here's this thing that everybody is talking about. Here's what this side says. Here's what this side says. Here's what this side, however many sides there are to that story. And we try to give everyone an equal and fair chance to get their input.
Yeah, it's funny just watching when I look at the Idaho Statesman in particular, how clickbaity the articles are. I mean, it's Mayor McLean did had a statement on this controversial topic, and you have to click on it to know. Here's what some senator said, and then this happened, and it's just all these vague things that you have to go and click on in order to see what's going on. Bryan, let's say that I'm just a news consumer, and I mean, you've become really good at this, where you're watching what people are reporting on and how they're reporting on. What do you look for? Because an article doesn't say, "Warning: this content is biased." What do you look for to know that a story is biased?
The headlines, as you pointed out, are a very good clue as to where they're going. And headlines are written to catch our attention. I mean, a good headline's supposed to grab you and pull you in, but it's also very proven and researched that among the things that really engage are fear and anger. So if a headline can tweak us, if it can reach out and tweak our nose and get us a little bit out of joint, there's a good chance we're going to click on it. If nothing else, just to see, is this what I really think it is? But there's also a lot of gotcha journalism. And anytime you find yourself reading something and suddenly, I think the example that you guys were both giving about where a story is completely written and then, well, we reached out to so-and-so after the fact that it was written. It's not like they were really sincerely trying to tell the story. And so as a consumer of news, one of the things I ask myself is, who benefits from the way that this story is being reported? And if it's just strictly coming down on one side, and in fact, if it not only comes down on one side, but goes so far as to show me that the other side is somehow stupid or deplorable or, irredeemable, that's a pretty good indicator that you're dealing with propaganda more so than actual journalism.
Yeah, I look for things like the word baseless, in describing somebody's opinion. The Trump administration or the Trump campaign promoted a baseless election fraud theory. Well, how do they know it's baseless? They talked to a bunch of government officials, and they said it was baseless, so it must be baseless. Or far right legislator or extremist legislators, they never say the same thing about folks on the left. But far right legislators, extreme legislators, there are never any far left legislators or extremist leftist legislators. Those are clues, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Joseph Bryan. I don't know
Yeah.
if you guys are familiar with Joe Sobran, but one of the great lessons that he taught as a writer was beware of what he called the unspecified predicate. And we see this a lot with the term hate. Well, that's hate speech that somebody's engaging in. But when someone uses that term hate, unless they really define what exactly do they mean by that, that just leaves the rest of us to make some kind of an emotional association with what we think it is. We all think hate can't be a good thing, but it's not going to be the same for every person. And when you approach it with that kind of ambiguity, an accusation is as good as a conviction, at least in the court of public opinion. We accuse someone of hate, and then the person who's made the accusation, they don't have to do any of the work to show why that thing should stick. They can just scurry back under their rock and let the person trying to defend themselves against this unspecified predicate try to answer all the concerns that come from so many different emotional associations people may have with that word.
Yeah.
That,
Sorry, I guess you kind of dropped off while me and Hyde were talking about recognizing bias in Idaho media, and I think you touched on a lot of it. For me, it's about the labeling. A lot of it is labeling and how they label groups and individuals. And like I told Hyde, I do my best, and I think in the beginning I wasn't as good at this, but I try to do it more now, where I leave out labels. I don't say the far left extremist group, Idaho 97%. I'll just say, here's the Idaho 97% group, and here's a quote from one of their leaders. Here's what they believe, yada, 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 based on actual facts, right? And the consumer can decide, okay, well, that's not, I don't like that group or that lawmaker or that activist or whatever, based on what they're doing, rather than me trying to label them for you, right? Because that's what they're doing. They want to label all these groups and all these people in order to push the viewer and the consumer into a certain direction on how they think about those individuals. So the next time there's a story like, oh yeah, that's that far right extremist that is totally racist and all this other stuff. And so we just, unless that person has self-labeled themselves, I try to leave it out.
Yeah, that used to be the rule, and in fact, the stuff that gets past a copy desk these days would have never gotten past a copy desk, as a ultra conservative or ultra right wing. I remember having a lot of discussions when I was at the Idaho Statesman, where a person was described as ultra conservative, and the copy editor would say, who made that judgment? Where did you get that knowledge that says that this person is ultra conservative, as opposed to just plain conservative, or maybe they're moderates. You just don't know. And a lot of the times, a reporter's assertions about who is conservative and who is not is based on a couple of issues: abortion, maybe a gun vote or two, or the NRA's rating for legislators, which I think is somewhat not accurate, but those things never got past a copy desk because they were considered superfluous adjectives. But now everything clears the copy desk.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that at all.
I wanted to get your thoughts on other aspects of news media, because they're interesting. There are a lot of pressures coming down on newsrooms that we didn't have when I was a journalist. For example, I had the AP style book, and I always read the AP style book. And if the style book said that, you referred to the FBI by the initials FBI because you don't need to say Federal Bureau of Investigations anymore, then that's what we did. If it said you only had to first reference the name of a congressman and with his title, and then you don't refer to the title anymore, that's how we did it. Now the style book is very steeped in wokeism. If you decide to use different pronouns, then by golly, that's what we're going to use for you. So we're going to use your different pronouns. And if we refer to your name, we have to use the name that you've designated, not your dead name in quotation marks. Anything else is hateful. There's just a lot of this stuff, and I'm just wondering, to what degree do you think that stuff like that is really influencing not just the news media, but the general public discourse about things?
I have a take on that, Wayne. I just saw a poll from Gallup earlier today that says, and I can't remember the size of the number of people that they surveyed, but they said that trust in the legacy media, meaning television and newspapers primarily, has dropped to 11%. And, you know, that's a pretty big drop in trust. I mean, somewhere used car salesmen and ambulance chasing lawyers are probably smiling. Oh, good.
Congress.
You know, we're starting to look better by comparison. But, you know, I have to believe that wokeism is where they've squandered a lot of their their credibility rather, simply because they've not only separated themselves from reality, but they're also insisting that everybody else has to do the same. And it appears that there's a sizable portion of the public that's saying, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the wokeism certainly would play a role. I think ultimately it's just been a long and arduous decline, which was sped up when Donald Trump became president. I think the very blatant attacks and mistruths and everything is really, I think that has gutted the legacy media far more than maybe what the AP style book has turned into, which certainly does, when the reporters start using that in the general, I just think the general public overall is just tired of it, right? They're tired of the news, especially political news, because it just, they get, and I talk to people all the time, they just get depressed and angry and frustrated and they just hate it.
So what do you do when let's say you have a story about the man in Idaho prison system who wants a sex change operation? Do you use the person's preferred pronouns, or do you use their actual gender?
Well, I would use whatever the biological sex is, but to be honest, I don't think I've ever had to write a story yet on anybody that requested a preferred pronoun. So I guess I've never wrote anything on that yet.
But people need to understand that is a dead giveaway of where the media is. If you see, gender pronouns that are different from a person's biological sex, that's a form of bias, media bias.
Yeah.
So if you look across the media landscape, a lot of folks, when they look at bias in the media, they talk about NPR, they talk about CNN, MSNBC. But the reason I wanted to have this conversation tonight is people understand that this is really happening in Idaho. This is your local newsroom, your TV station, your newspaper, the Idaho Capital Sun, Idaho Ed News. By the way, that's another interesting thing that we should talk about. They're not immune from this. They're doing this too, and so don't think just because you picked up the Idaho Statesman today that it's not MSNBC, you're getting the full story on stuff.
Yeah, go ahead, Hyde.
I think there are, you're not going to find an unbiased source, but there also is a decision that we have to make as consumers of news, and that is what really matters to me. And, frankly, people who have recommended take a media fast every so often and seriously just unplug from all legacy media, maybe even social media too. I know that when I do that on occasion, the world starts looking more normal and feeling more normal within just a couple of days. And I frankly have reached the point where I watch very, very little and I read very little legacy media unless there's something that I want to know more about. And then I often will go to it just to see, okay, I wonder what their take is on this particular subject. But I no longer trust them to be an authoritative source of information on just about anything that I want to study. I'll look and see what they're saying and okay, get an idea. That's where they're coming at it from, either the woke or the left-wing point of view. But I will find my own sources, and if it's something that I don't really care about enough to do my own homework on, there are things that I make the decision that it's just not important enough for me to invest moral energy in trying to pursue it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of information out there, and unfortunately, you don't have time to. You have to sort of decide what it is you want to know about and how important it is to you. My view is there are some things out there that are really important to know, and those things might be about the national economy, could be about tax policy, something that affects your pocketbook, your business, your family. And when you see a news article, instead of just reading the article and trusting it, find the source material. A lot of the source material is out there. There are court cases, legal filings, criminal records, histories, voting records. All that stuff is out there, and so you have to do your own research and not just depend on some scribe's interpretation of what actually is going on.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we've touched on this, but the shift has just been kind of fascinating to watch because years ago I'd done a number of interviews with reporters with KTVB and Channel 2 and a whole bunch of them with the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance, and now like I don't even bother because they only want to call me when something goes wrong or talk to me when something goes wrong, and that's what with Idaho Dispatch we didn't want to go down that route, but the reporting, they're mixing it so bad now that you don't know. So for instance, like Tucker Carlson, right? That's an opinion show. He doesn't try to pretend to be some unbiased news anchor. He just does his opinion show. Rachel Maddow, same thing. She just does her opinion show. And then here in Idaho, you take like Bryan Holmes, for instance, with KTVB. I think I even asked him one time in email, I'm like, are you an opinion show? Or are you trying to do like a news anchor at 10 thing? I'm confused. Like, which one is it? And he never responded to that question.
Did he answer?
No. Of course not. But then you watch, they did a 3-part or 4-part series, I guess, on the Idaho Freedom Foundation, completely slanted in one direction. And that's what they just seem to be all focused on. It's like, for instance, take Dorothy Moon, who just became the new Idaho Republican Party chair. In her speech, she said, and we've got our guns loaded. And immediately I was texting people going, watch, this is going to be the headline all across every Idaho media outlet. And sure enough, about an hour later, Dorothy Moon says guns are loaded for the Democrats. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like why? It's that bad now that they
and everything's a threat, right?
Yeah.
It's a good example of that enemy-driven thinking that Greg and I were talking about earlier too, and look, we can all be guilty of it. And I just have found I'm happier when I'm not allowing myself to be enemy-driven in my thinking, because it makes me much more easy to be manipulated, and I don't like to be manipulated. So if something is eliciting, a sense of revulsion or anger, I always like to pull back and go, okay, why is that being reported that way? Is this to make me hate Dorothy Moon, or is this to make me feel fear because she used the term "our guns are loaded and we're ready to go"? And yeah, the media is they're very blatant about it, and I can only hope that the sense of skepticism is continuing to grow, because it's manipulative, to put it nicely.
Yeah. So I want to read this comment. Angela Frazier said, "That's weird how he," meaning Bryan Holmes, "never responded every episode of the 208, which is Bryan Holmes' show, I guess. He complains that conservatives never respond." And I remember that series about the Idaho Freedom Foundation, and he mentioned in the broadcast, like, we reached out to Wayne Hoffman. He said he would sit down, but we had to broadcast the entire interview. And I get that, right? You can't put that on TV. But I said, well, why not put it on your YouTube channel? Like, put Wayne's entire thing on the YouTube channel and then say in the broadcast, hey, we did an entire interview with Idaho Freedom Foundation President Wayne Hoffman. We can't air that because it's too long. But if you go to our YouTube channel, you can see his response to this entire series. That seems like a very fair and accurate way to let you respond to whatever they were doing.
That's exactly right. I mean, theoretically, if they were going to come out, they're going to interview me anyway, right? And
Yeah.
so why not do the whole thing? And I didn't want them to just take a 15-second segment, 15-second segment, and put it on in their story, and then everything else was cut out. And so I thought that was a reasonable arrangement. It's not like they lack for space on YouTube, right? So if they were really, and I never really encountered. I mean, I guess I have, but this was probably an extreme example. An example of a news reporter who simply didn't want to know what our opinion was because of the conditions we had laid down. I've had over the years interview subjects who said to me, "I don't want to be photographed. I don't want to be recorded, either videotaped or audio tape." And that was the deal, And when I was in radio and I wanted to get a story, I still interviewed the person, even though they said, "I don't want to be recorded." What was I just not going to interview them, not going to find out what their side of the story was? So my decision was to go and interview them. And it's too bad I don't have audio tape for that. But that was what I needed to do to get the story. Now they're not interested. It's quite fascinating, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. It's turned, and again, I'm busy. Like, I don't have time to run a news organization on top of what I'm doing, but I feel that passionately about it. And it's just so manipulative. And like, so Maria Nate made a comment. She says, and they manipulate with their photos as well. Always the most unflattering photos of conservatives. And that's true. And you watch a lot of their photos and it's like, they'll take the worst one where their mouth is twisted in a weird direction when they're talking. And all this kind of stuff, and they do that all the time. When I get pictures, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was thinking of the woman who was charged in the January 6th deal from Idaho, and every time they used her picture on the Statesman's webpage, it's a picture of her face all contorted with her eyes bulging out. Can't remember her name right now, but she doesn't look like that. I've seen pictures of her. She doesn't look like that at all. It's just that's the picture that they choose to use. And then meanwhile, at the same time, we know about the dude swimmer, Leah Thompson, whatever his name is, who they photoshopped his photo to lighten it, make it look more feminine. This is the kind of stuff that they've been doing. They didn't do this before. Now they are. I mean, that was considered a crime against journalism, photojournalism. When anyone ever thought about it, you didn't use Photoshop, you used Lightbox, so that you just make little subtle changes here and there, shadowing and stuff like that, but nothing to alter the actual news subject. They do it all the time now. They make the leftists look good. They make the conservatives look bad. It's just what they do.
Yeah. When I'm doing my thumbnails for my stories or whatever, press releases, I will go to that person. Let's say it's an elected official. I'll go to their website or social media or something, and I will grab one of their own pictures, their official pictures, to use, right? If I do an interview and I need a thumbnail from that interview and I need to take a screenshot, sometimes I'll sit there for like 8 times trying to grab a screenshot where that person doesn't look all contorted and all that stuff, where we both kind of look normal. And it just doesn't seem like the legacy media even bothers to do that, like you said, unless it's somebody from the left, and then they try to get the best photo they possibly can, for their thumbnail.
You can see a good example of this today on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., where there was a protest outside the Supreme Court, and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar were led away by police. And both of these women put their hands behind their backs as if they were handcuffed. They weren't handcuffed, but the way that certain photographs were taken, the media, oh, look, they were arrested, and it gives every impression, my goodness, they were frog marched away from there in handcuffs when they never were. And the question I've just trained myself to ask over and over as I look at either the images or as I read the story and see the language and the rhetorics that's used is, who benefits from the way that this is being portrayed? And it's not that I'm looking for a conspiracy. I'm just trying to see, is it being portrayed fairly, or is somebody trying to lead me to some preordained conclusion. And if they're trying to lead me there, their credibility is dropping by the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess, sorry, go ahead, Wayne.
Go ahead.
No, I would say before I forget, one of the things that we're doing a survey at the Idaho Dispatch, an informal, non-scientific survey, whatever. So if people go to our website, we have a poll running because I'm really curious on what do people want. When we created the Idaho Dispatch, the goal was we're going to be as unbiased and neutral, objective and fair and everything as much as we possibly can. Let's try to do it the right way, so to speak. But is that what Idahoans want? If Idaho is mostly a conservative state, and it obviously is, it's at least a very Republican state in terms of registration numbers. But what does the public want? What does the market want? Do people want very biased conservative slant, or maybe a little bit of conservative slant, or do they want a little bit of liberal slant, or all liberal slant? You don't have a preference, or do you want it the way that we're trying to do it? And I don't really care what your answer is, because for me, it's a market thing. If the market's not there for the Idaho Dispatch, and if people don't care about having news the way that we're trying to do it, then maybe it's not worth it in the end. I don't think that that's true, but that's what our poll is over on Idaho Dispatch. And if you go over there, it'll pop up right away, and you can answer that, because I'd be really curious to know.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know the results of that too. There's a lot of history for biased journalism. I mean, I grew up in the age of objective journalism, and I remember my mentor. I tell this story sometimes. My mentor, Ralph, he was my mentor at the time. I was a reporter at the Idaho Press Tribune in Nampa, and my soon-to-be mentor called me and said, "Is this Wayne Hoffman?" It was Ralph Smead. And I said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "Well, your stories are biased." And I said, "No, sir, I'm an objective reporter." And I truly believed that. And so he said, "Well, I'll bet you lunch. And if I can prove it, then you buy me lunch." So he sent me some stuff on the proper role of government. He sent me a copy of iPencil, a copy of the law. And I realized that all of my reporting was government-centric. So it goes something like this. Mr. Hyde has a problem with the planning and zoning department at the city, and he calls up his favorite reporter, Wayne Hoffman, and says, "I'm having a problem with the city." And then Wayne Hoffman calls the city and says, "Hey, Bryan Hyde just called me and said he's having this problem." And the city says, "Oh, no, Bryan Hyde doesn't understand the issue. What's really going on is this." And so it's either not a story or it's downplayed so much that Bryan Hyde looks stupid for having called me and complained. And I mean, there's just the moral of the story is I did, and a lot of reporters had and still have, a bias towards government, that they believe when a government official says something's true, it's true. And it's sort of like, look at the COVID stuff. The government says that you get the vaccine and it'll prevent the spread of COVID, and it'll prevent you from getting it. Well, neither of that's turned true, but the media just cover that up and say, well, the narrative has changed, the science has changed, the science has evolved, or whatever. And but this has been happening forever, and I remember many of occasions where somebody will call me and the stories are extremely weighted towards the position of government. And maybe it's because they teach us in journalism school that government officials know what they're talking about, or the public doesn't understand stuff, or maybe they just didn't tell us enough about how government operates and distrust government. But there is just this love affair with. I just got done writing a column. It's not out yet, but there's a story in the paper the other day. One of the papers, I think it was the Idaho Press, and it said government to invest $66 million in behavioral health, and how wonderful it was going to be, and it was going to solve all these mental health problems. No, it's not. It's not. But the officials say it will, so I guess it will. I mean, that's how that works. Crazy.
Something you pointed out, Wayne, And I want to go back to an earlier comment that I had seen come by on the screen here. Someone had said, well, look, if you're a working class family, how do you have time to go out there and be a news reporter? And I get that, to fact check and to do your homework, it requires a fairly significant investment of time. But that time can be significantly shortened if you have a solid foundation of principles from which you view the world. You mentioned the proper role of government. You mentioned Leonard Read's essay, I Pencil. These are not super long treatises. Frederick Bastiat's The Law. These are things that a person could easily read and understand. If not in a weekend, they could sit down and study them over the course of a month, and they would know when they read a story, if this story is being presented in a way that favors, the official government point of view, where they're being more of a stenographer and less of a reporter. And that's really one of the keys to questioning a lot of the policies and a lot of the reporting, is knowing what the base principles are that are at stake. And you'll find yourself asking questions instead of, well, should government be investing this much, in this education initiative, or should it be investing this much? You start asking questions like, where does government have the power to tax and take that money and invest it in the first place?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, decades ago, the media used to be a watchdog on government, right? It used to take allegations of government corruption, look for any facts that they could, and then give that to the public and say, hey, you can ask more questions, or if you've got more information, let us know. And the media a lot of times doesn't like to do that anymore, because they want those friends, right? They want those connections inside the government to be able to talk to, rather than just reporting on those allegations. The FBI had been investigating the several police officers in Caldwell for over a year, and nobody had reported it until we did it. And we got a tip. We did some investigating, did some digging, confirmed that there was an investigation, and then we reported it. Well, guess what? From that, we ended up with 2 more whistleblowers. And those whistleblowers gave us more information about what was happening within the Caldwell Police Department. And we just kept reporting on it. And finally, the legacy media was like, okay, I guess we'll go ahead and pick this up now that Greg's done it. Of course, they didn't give us any credit, but whatever. I'm not a real reporter, so why would they? But yeah, so that's one thing we also want the Idaho Dispatch to be able to do a lot more of, is if you're working within government and there's corruption, you can provide evidence or some sort of facts that we can use to do an investigation. We would love to do that and let the public know what is happening. I think Idaho has gotten to a place where everybody just kind of, it's my neighbor, it's my close neighbor, it's my friend, it's this, it's that. We don't need to worry about corruption in Idaho. Everything's totally fine. And I think that actually breeds more corruption when we have that kind of trust.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. I mean, the stories that could be written about the corruption, the malfeasance, the misfeasance. I mean, it's happening in Idaho. I think people are deluding themselves that they think that it's not, and the media seem to just be covering up for that stuff. And in fact, they're pretty outspoken in their support of increased government programs, increased government spending, increased mandates by government. And by the way, the other thing people should know is that a lot of the newsrooms don't have the resources that they used to have to cover stories themselves. And so what they've done is you have to watch bylines. If you pick up a copy of the Idaho Press, the Idaho Statesman, you'll see stories in there from Idaho Education News, which is a left-of-center news publication. You'll see Idaho Capital Sun, which is very left-of-center and openly funded and employs woke journalists that they look for. They look for woke journalists in their for their hiring. And then you've got Report for America, which is funded by very left of center organizations. They're implanted in newsrooms, including the Statesman and the Idaho Press Tribune and others. So you really have to pay close attention to not just the news outlet you're getting information from, but also the bylines that you're seeing in those news outlets, because they are themselves extraordinarily, they're paid to be biased. They're openly biased in terms of the kinds of stories they're looking to cover and the people they're looking to do the coverage.
Yeah. Wayne, you mentioned, I mean, that's always kind of fascinating to me, is because one outlet will write a story and then all the other outlets in Idaho just pick it up, maybe change the headline a little bit, put the byline in there. This was originally written by so-and-so. I'm like, really? You don't have anybody else that can just write your own story about this? And so they're all just kind of working together, sharing the same stuff over and over again, and slanting everything towards conservatives. One of the, I guess, interesting things that I saw over a couple months ago, Wayne, and I think I actually talked to you about this, was there was a Canyon County prosecutor, or excuse me, Canyon County commissioner, who had a multi-million-dollar bankruptcy that was filed in like 2020. So it'd been a couple years, but nobody had reported on it. And her and her husband filed this bankruptcy, and they owed $100,000 to the government, some to the IRS, some to the state of Washington, and nobody would covered it. And I actually know, and I have proof, that reporters at the Idaho Press and the Idaho Statesman both were given this information before I got it, and they didn't run with it. And I thought, this is insane. Like, if this was, we're in Canyon County, so this was Tammy Nichols, Representative Tammy Nichols, and she had a $12.7 million bankruptcy, that would be all over the state of Idaho, on the front page of every paper and news outlet and radio. I mean, the whole thing. Janice McGeehan, same thing. If that was her, that coverage would have been massive, and yet nobody wanted to cover something huge like that. And I for the life of me, I can't understand why.
It's like Hunter Biden's laptop.
Yeah.
By the way, I'd also tell you that the problems don't end on the news pages, on the editorial pages as well. My friend Doyle Beck called me. He's over in eastern Idaho, and he was trying to get a column printed in the Post Register, and the editorial board refused. They actually sat on it for like 2 weeks. And then they sent him an email saying, well, can you prove this information about, he was talking about Frank Vandersloot and his contributions to the Democrat Party. And they supplied proof. They still wouldn't run it. And interestingly, whenever people say anything about me on the Idaho Post Register's editorial page, they don't seek out, to see whether it's true. Idaho Freedom Foundation's funded with dark money, all that kind of stuff. They just run it. They no evidence required, just the ability to pound a couple keys on your typewriter, and you'll get on the editorial page. The other thing I found too is that anybody who writes a column criticizing the Freedom Foundation gets printed in every paper state. I run an article criticizing the Brad Little administration or state legislators, can't get anywhere. It's just really fascinating. Anyway, a few minutes left. Closing thoughts, gentlemen. What should Idahoans do to be prepared, to be knowledgeable, but also not misinformed by the press?
Yeah, go ahead, Hyde.
I'm going to actually more people need to be willing to do what Greg has done, and if it really matters to them, they need to be willing to step up and become that reliable source of information. Now, Greg, you flat out admitted, look, I'm not perfect, I have bias and so forth, but that authenticity is what gives you credibility and makes you a source that people would be willing to trust, whether they agree with you or not. At least they know this guy's shooting straight. But we need more people to step up and be willing to be the fact finders. It's not that hard. I mean, come on, we all carry, these cell phones and stuff around with us. It's easy to get information, and it's easy to convey that information. We just need more people willing to and committed to stepping up and being a voice, whether they're professional journalists or not. The gatekeepers are guarding gates to which there are no fences. It's never been easier to help get the truth out there.
Yeah,
very true.
And I know, Wayne, I've had discussions with you about it, but we live in a capitalist or semi-capitalist country. Seems like we're moving away from it, but the reality is, Idahoans and the public in general, based on polling, are just tired of the media. Like, they hate the legacy media. Okay, well, if you hate the legacy media, then you need to support the companies and groups and organizations that are trying to give you a better product, right? I mean, that's how capitalism works. That's how the market should work, is that if you're tired of this crap, then support a company like Idaho Dispatch, where we're trying to do it the right way. And that support can't just come from readership. It needs to be monetary support. So, you can subscribe to Idaho Dispatch at idahodispatch.com/subscribe, and it's $3 a month. Is $3 a month worth it in the end for us to try and keep this operation going? This is so much work. It's so exhausting, and I'm I'm beat, but I believe in it. I love it, and I hope that it's something we can continue. But we don't have a billionaire funding our operation, right? We don't have massive corporations funding our operation. It's literally you guys. It's the subscribers. And so without thousands and thousands of subscribers, the Idaho Dispatch will not exist at some point, and so we encourage everybody to go subscribe for $3 a month, pitch in a little bit. And that's your way of, if you hate the legacy media, then stick it to them by subscribing to the Idaho Dispatch, I guess. Whatever your motivation is, we'd love to have you guys support our efforts. So
that's really what it comes down to, isn't it, Greg? How much does it matter to you? Does the truth matter enough to you that you'd be willing to forego the cost of a cup of coffee or, something in order to have access to it? And if that's the case, vote with your wallet. And that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
Well, Wayne has dropped off again, and I think we're probably at the end of the program, but what an opportunity and what an honor to get to hang out with both of you. I hope you both will keep up the fantastic work you're doing. I think you both take slings and arrows that really you don't deserve, but that's the price of speaking truth in these times. And I'm sure grateful that you do it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on, and I think it's been a good conversation, and I hope Idahoans, appreciate what we're all trying to do. And, in the end, it's up to Idahoans to determine how this all goes. So we'll see.
Okay, we'll end with this invitation to those of you who are viewing. If you haven't already, please subscribe and continue to follow the efforts of the Idaho Freedom Foundation, as well as the Idaho Dispatch. And hopefully we'll be talking again soon in a future show.
All right.
You've been listening to the Hoff Time Report with Wayne Hoffman. Be sure to visit idahofreedom.org for Wayne's articles, IFF research, and show notes from today's episode.